The city's skyline gleamed in the distance, its towering buildings like giants watching over the small, unsuspecting streets below. In one of the shabby neighborhoods on the outskirts, a young girl named Sophie had just returned home. Her mother, Clara, barely noticed the quiet shuffle of footsteps as Sophie entered, her small frame barely a shadow in the doorframe. The scene inside their apartment was silent, suffocating with the weight of grief. Clara had been devastated, lost in the agony of her daughter's kidnapping, her soul fractured with every passing day that Sophie remained missing. The police had failed. No ransom had been demanded. Sophie had vanished without a trace, swallowed up by the dark underbelly of the city. But today, a miracle had occurred. Sophie was back. Clara turned to face her daughter, her heart leaping with a mixture of joy and confusion. Her eyes scanned Sophie's appearance, noting the dirt on her clothes, the weary yet defiant look in her eyes. She hadn't changed in her absence, but something about her demeanor felt different. There was an air of authority about her now, as if the little girl who had been so frightened before had been replaced by someone with a new, unshakable sense of purpose. Sophie gazed back at her mother, her expression unreadable for a moment. "Mom," she whispered softly, almost as though she was afraid of the words she was about to speak. "I want you to marry him." Clara's brows furrowed. "Marry who?" she asked, not understanding. She had expected Sophie to cry out, to beg her for comfort after being returned to her. Instead, her daughter had made an absurd request: marry a man. "But who?" "The man who saved me," Sophie continued, her voice firm. "The beggar." Clara blinked in shock, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what her daughter meant. A beggar? Who was this beggar? She thought back to the moment Sophie had been returned, to the unremarkable man standing by the police officer who had dropped Sophie at their doorstep. He had been dressed in rags, his beard unkempt, his eyes dark with a heavy weight of sorrow. He looked nothing like the man who could have possibly saved her daughter. The scene played back in Clara's mind like a cruel joke. The beggar had barely spoken a word, his hand extended to Sophie with a hesitant tenderness, as though he too was unsure of the reason for his actions. Why would Sophie want him to marry her? "I'm not marrying a beggar," Clara said, the words slipping out before she could stop herself. She felt an uneasy tension creep through her chest, her hands trembling as she tried to process what Sophie had said. "Why would you want that? He's just a beggar." Sophie's gaze grew intense, a piercing look that caught Clara off guard. "You don't know who he really is, do you?" Sophie asked, her voice almost a challenge. Clara shook her head, her mind racing with confusion and disbelief. "What do you mean?"
Sophie stepped forward, her small hands trembling as she reached out, grabbing her mother's hand and holding it with surprising strength. "He's not just a beggar. He's my father, Mom. He's the man who disappeared all those years ago. The CEO. Clara's heart stuttered in her chest. "What are you talking about? How could you know that? He's just a beggar," she repeated, her voice rising, the panic starting to seep through her words. Sophie's eyes softened, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "You don't recognize him, do you? He was always so kind, so patient with me. He never treated me like I was broken or weak. When they took me, he saved me from those men. I heard them talking, Mom. They said he paid them to let me go, to keep me safe." Clara's mind reeled, her thoughts tumbling like stones in a whirlpool. She remembered the man who had vanished years ago, the one who had been a billionaire CEO, the one who had disappeared from their lives without a trace. They had assumed he was dead, perhaps murdered, or maybe had run away. The disappearance had devastated Clara, had left her wondering if she had somehow missed the signs, if there had been something she could have done to stop it. But now, Sophie was telling her that the beggar, the man who had seemed so ordinary, so defeated in his ragged clothes, was the very person who had once been Clara's husband. Her heart clenched with disbelief. How could this be possible? How could the love of her life have become so unrecognizable, so utterly different? Sophie took a deep breath, steadying herself as she looked her mother in the eye. "I know you don't want to believe me, but I've seen him, Mom. I've heard him. He's the one who saved me. He's the one who's been watching over me all this time. Clara felt her legs give way beneath her, her body collapsing into a chair as her mind raced to make sense of the impossible. But why? Why didn't he come to us? She whispered, her voice barely audible, filled with a raw vulnerability that only a mother could understand. Sophie hesitated, her expression shifting as if she was about to reveal something even more heart-wrenching. He thought you didn't need him. He thought you were better off without him. He was afraid you'd hate him for what happened, for abandoning us all those years ago. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, the weight of the years pressing down on her. She had spent so long trying to heal, trying to move on, but now, with Sophie's words, it was as if the past had come rushing back, flooding her heart with a mixture of anger, regret, and love. I don't understand, Clara whispered, her voice cracking. I don't understand any of this. Sophie placed a hand on her mother's, her touch soft but firm. You don't have to. But please, Mom, marry him. He's changed. He's not the man you remember, but he's the man I know. He's my father. He's our family.
Clara's chest tightened as she looked at her daughter, the same girl who had been taken from her, who had now come back with such conviction. Her heart screamed with confusion, with the agony of lost time, of a love that had once been so pure and now lay shattered by the years of separation. But in that moment, Clara knew one thing for certain. She had to find him. She had to find the man who had once been her world, her love, the man who had somehow returned in the form of a beggar, the man who had saved her daughter, the man who was impossibly still alive. With a shaky breath, Clara stood up, wiping the tears from her eyes. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice steadier now, filled with determination. Sophie smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek as she whispered, "He's waiting for you." And with that, Clara left the apartment, her heart pounding in her chest, knowing that her world was about to be turned upside down once again. The past was not gone, and the future was uncertain. But in the depths of her soul, she knew that something miraculous was about to unfold, something that would change everything. And it all began with the beggar.